The sky over the royal station glimmered with cold, silver light. Ships moved like tiny fireflies against the dark void, carrying goods, officials, and sometimes trouble. High above, the Empress's palace floated, shining like a jewel. It was a fortress of glass, metal, and power, built to remind the galaxy of the Empire's strength. Inside, no one dared move without purpose. Every corner, every hallway whispered history, tradition, and authority. The Empress, a tall figure with feathers pure as snow, walked down the main corridor. Her eyes were sharp, watching everything at once. She was known across the stars for her wisdom and her strictness. Nothing happened in her empire without her knowing. Yet today she carried a small tension in her chest, a mix of curiosity and worry. Something unusual had arrived at her palace, something she did not expect, something she could not control. The visitor was a human child. Small, fragile, and trembling, the child's presence had already caused whispers throughout the palace. Humans were rare in this part of space. They came from a planet of extremes, where life was dangerous and survival was earned through cunning, strength, and adaptability. They were called Deathworlders by many, and few dared approach them lightly. But this human child, this one seemed harmless. Even so, the Empress did not trust it. The child had been brought here after a border skirmish between human explorers and the Empire's patrol ships. No one knew why the child had survived alone, or how it had crossed the void unscathed. All they knew was that it had been found wandering near a derelict station, hungry, frightened, and alone. The Empress entered the nursery with the albino chicks. They were rare, even by imperial standards, born with pale feathers that glowed softly under the lights. Their skin was delicate, and their eyes, large and untrained, looked at the world with confusion. Many in the Empire doubted that the chicks could survive long. They were weak, fragile, and required constant care. Their survival depended on order, routine, and the careful hands of the palace caretakers. Today, however, the routine was broken. The human child was brought into the nursery, carried gently by two guards. The child's eyes were wide, drinking in the scene, looking at the glowing chicks and the swirling soft feathers that surrounded them. The chicks squeaked and flapped nervously. Their caretakers whispered frantic instructions. "Stay calm, don't scare them, watch the distance." The Empress remained silent. She expected chaos, as her advisors had warned. A human in the nursery could only mean trouble. The child's species was known for unpredictability. How could a fragile, tiny human survive the palace, let alone gain the trust of her prized albino chicks? But something unusual happened. As soon as the human child sat quietly on the floor, the chicks hesitated. They stared at the newcomer with curiosity instead of fear. One, the smallest of the group, waddled forward, tilting its head. The child stretched out a hand slowly, carefully, and touched the chick's soft feathers. The nursery went still. No one had ever seen the chicks behave this way. Usually, even the caretakers could not approach them without fear of a panic. But the chick leaned into the touch, closing its tiny eyes. Another chick joined. Then another. Soon, all of them were surrounding the human child, chirping softly as if they had finally found safety. The Empress watched, her heart caught between awe and disbelief. She had never expected this. Her chicks were supposed to be weak. They were supposed to need only her empire's protection. And yet, here they were, choosing comfort from a human child. Caretakers exchanged nervous glances. One whispered, "Majesty, this is unprecedented. They have never reacted like this." "I see that," the Empress said quietly, her eyes never leaving the scene. Her voice was soft but carried authority. "Observe, but do not interfere." The human child remained calm, speaking in a soft voice that no one understood. The words seemed meaningless, yet the tone carried warmth. The chicks leaned closer, chirping quietly, some nuzzling against the human's hands and clothing. Even the strongest chick, usually skittish and wild, bowed its head. The Empress felt an unfamiliar feeling rise inside her. It was not fear. It was not anger. It was something new, something she could not name. Perhaps it was awe. Days passed, and the human child stayed in the nursery. Guards and caretakers took shifts, ensuring the child was never left alone. Yet, each day, the bond between the human and the albino chicks grew stronger. They followed the child's movements, chirped in patterns when it spoke, and sometimes even slept beside the child. The palace scientists were baffled. They ran tests, measured heart rates, tracked the chicks' growth and health. Every report showed the same thing. The chicks were thriving in a way they never had before. Their fragile bones grew stronger, their feathers glimmered more brightly, their eyes became sharper. The human child did nothing extraordinary, just stayed nearby, gentle and calm, but that was enough. Political advisors whispered behind closed doors. "Majesty, this is dangerous. We cannot rely on a human for the future of the chicks." The Empress ignored them. She could feel it. Humans were different, yes. They were unpredictable, but perhaps that unpredictability carried something her empire had never seen: instinctive care, emotional strength, and courage that did not need recognition. Then came the day of the crisis. The palace's energy system failed, a rare but dangerous malfunction. Alarms blared as lights flickered and machinery groaned. The nursery doors locked automatically to protect the chicks. Caretakers ran in panic, trying to stabilize the environment, but the system was failing fast. The human child did not panic. Sitting on the floor, the child gathered the chicks close. They huddled together, feathers brushing, small wings wrapping around the human. The child's voice was low, calm, a whisper that seemed to flow through the room. Miraculously, the chicks remained calm. Their panic vanished, replaced by trust. For the first time, the nursery did not echo with frantic chirps. Instead, there was quiet. A strange, soothing quiet. The Empress arrived as soon as she could. She expected disaster, but instead she found the human child and the albino chicks safe, calm, and connected in a way she could not explain. Machinery would be fixed, she knew. But something else had been fixed too, something deeper, something she had not anticipated. When the energy system was restored, caretakers stepped back, stunned. The chicks were uninjured. Health readings were better than before. Scientists scratched their heads. None could explain it. The Empress looked at the human child. The child's eyes met hers for the first time. There was no fear, no expectation, only calm understanding. Something inside her shifted. Humans were not weak. They were not fragile. Perhaps they carried something no one else did: instinctive care, quiet strength, and a connection to life itself that could tame even the most delicate creatures. By the evening, the Empress made her decision. "The child will remain under my protection," she declared to the palace council. Her voice was firm, surprising many. "No one shall interfere. This human belongs to the chicks and through them to the empire." The council murmured in protest. "Majesty, this could be dangerous." "What if—" "I will take that risk," she interrupted. "The empire survives not by fear alone, but by wisdom. Observe, learn, and understand." That night the human child sat among the albino chicks, stroking their soft feathers. The chicks leaned against the child, chirping quietly, their pale feathers glowing softly under the nursery lights. Outside, the stars glittered, indifferent to the small miracle happening inside the palace. The Empress watched from the doorway, silent and thoughtful. The empire was strong, yes, but it had never seen anything like this. A human child, fragile and small, had touched her albino chicks in a way no one else could, and somehow that touch had changed everything. For the first time, she allowed herself to hope. Perhaps this unexpected guest could teach the empire something new. Perhaps it could show even an empress, ruler of thousands of worlds, that strength was not only measured in power or weapons, but in care, trust, and the quiet courage of the heart. And so the human child remained. Under the eyes of the Empress, watched by scientists and guardians, nurtured by the rare albino chicks, the small human became more than a visitor. It became a symbol. A reminder that even in the cold vastness of space, even among empires built on tradition and fear, life had a way of surprising those who dared to look closely and to care. The Empress closed the door that night with a thought she could not dismiss. Perhaps this human child will teach me more than any council or battle ever could. The days passed slowly in the Empress's palace, but for the human child and the albino chicks, every day brought something new. The human was no longer a stranger to the nursery. The chicks had grown used to the soft presence, the gentle hands, the quiet voice that spoke in tones no one else could understand. Their pale feathers shimmered more brightly, and their small eyes glimmered with curiosity and trust. The palace staff had begun to notice subtle changes. Tasks that had been difficult for the chicks, balancing, flapping, even simple coordination, had become easier. Their movements were smoother, more confident, and less hesitant. Scientists examined them with surprise. "We cannot explain it," one whispered. "The human does nothing, and yet the chicks thrive." The Empress herself watched quietly from a balcony overlooking the nursery. She had come many times to see the child at work, speaking softly to the chicks, stroking feathers, and offering calm reassurance. Each visit left her with a strange feeling she could not name. Humans were unpredictable, yes, and her people had always viewed them with caution. But here was a human doing nothing remarkable, yet achieving the impossible. Some of the palace council members were unhappy. "Majesty," one said in a tense voice, "we cannot allow a human to have influence here. It is dangerous." "What if the child harms the chicks or worse, causes a political incident? Remove it from the nursery immediately." The Empress shook her head. "You do not understand," she replied calmly. "The human is not a threat. The chicks have chosen it. That alone is enough reason for it to remain. Observe and learn." The council grumbled but knew better than to argue further. The Empress's word was law, even when it defied tradition. One morning, an unexpected event tested the bond between human and chicks. A sudden alarm sounded throughout the palace. One of the outer laboratories had suffered a containment breach, and exotic gases were leaking. The emergency protocols required full evacuation of all non-essential personnel. The nursery, though far from the lab, was affected by the emergency lockdown. Doors sealed automatically, lights flickered, and the atmosphere shifted. Caretakers rushed to secure the chicks, but as usual, the chicks panicked when handled too roughly. They squawked, flapped wildly, and cried for something familiar. The human child, however, did not panic. Sitting calmly on the floor, the child held out hands and spoke softly, humming a tune no one understood. The albino chicks stopped their frantic movements. One by one, they quieted, settling into the human's lap and against its legs. The hissing alarm seemed less threatening, the flickering lights less frightening. The child did nothing heroic, no feats of strength, no magical words, simply remained present, calm and reassuring. The Empress watched from the balcony, her feathers ruffling slightly in disbelief. "Unbelievable," she whispered. "The chicks trust a human completely." By the time the containment breach was resolved and the lab secured, the nursery remained unharmed. The chicks had not only survived, they were healthier than before. Their feathers glowed softly in the restored lights, their eyes clear and bright, and their movements full of confidence. The palace scientists conducted more tests, but every measurement showed the same surprising pattern. The chicks' vital signs improved dramatically in the presence of the human child. Their energy levels, balance, and coordination all improved. Emotional responses, hitherto unpredictable and fragile, now showed stability. It was as if the child's calm presence was a kind of medicine, invisible but undeniably real. The Empress could no longer deny the truth she had suspected for weeks. The human had something extraordinary. Not the power of weapons or authority, but a different kind of strength, a quiet, instinctive ability to nurture and protect life, even alien life. Word of the humans' bond with the chicks spread quietly among palace staff. Some whispered about it, afraid to speak openly. "It is unnatural," one murmured. "No human should have this influence." Others were more curious. "Perhaps there is something we can learn," said another. "The child may have knowledge, abilities, insight we cannot yet understand." Despite the growing attention, the human remained unchanged. Each day it played with the chicks, fed them small morsels, and spoke softly. Even the strongest chicks, those usually independent and wild, would perch on the child's shoulders or nuzzle close. The Empress sometimes observed without being noticed. She realized she had begun to understand the human, not as a threat, but as a unique being, small, fragile, yet capable of shaping life in ways her empire had never seen. Then came the challenge that would test their bond further. A neighboring empire, jealous of the Empress's rule and wary of her rare albino chicks, sent a diplomatic envoy. They demanded that the human be removed from the palace immediately, claiming it could corrupt the chicks or endanger imperial secrets. The council was divided. Some argued compliance, fearing conflict. Others whispered that the Empress's rule had been weakened by this human interference. The Empress, however, stood firm. "The child stays," she declared in a voice that echoed through the halls. "It is not here for political gain nor for influence. It is here because the chicks need it. That alone is reason enough." The diplomats were stunned. "Majesty, this is highly irregular," one said. "Your position, your empire." "My position is clear," the Empress interrupted. "I answer to no one but the survival and growth of my empire and those in my care. The human is under my protection, and that protection is absolute." The diplomats left, murmuring their disbelief, and the Empress returned to the nursery. She found the human child surrounded by the chicks, who chirped and flapped joyfully. The sight warmed her in a way she could not explain. A tiny human, powerless by most standards, had defied not just the council but an entire political system, and earned the trust of her rarest treasures. Over the following days, the bond strengthened even further. The human child discovered small ways to engage with the chicks, playing games that stimulated their minds and senses. The chicks responded eagerly, showing signs of intelligence that astounded scientists. They learned patterns, remembered simple commands, and even began to mimic some of the humans' quiet gestures. The Empress began to attend these sessions regularly, curious about what she could learn. She noticed that when the human spoke, even softly, the chicks' hearts calmed, their movements synchronized, and their eyes sparkled with alertness. She began to understand that strength was not always measured in weapons, influence, or authority. Sometimes it was measured in the quiet power of care, patience, and understanding. One afternoon, a minor accident tested their trust once more. A tray of experimental food toppled in the nursery, spilling liquids and scattering small objects. The chicks squeaked in alarm, flapping frantically. The palace staff hesitated, unsure how to respond. But the human child moved calmly through the chaos, gently guiding the chicks away from harm and cleaning up the mess with careful hands. The chicks followed the human without hesitation. They trusted the human's movements instinctively, reacting to subtle cues and tiny gestures. The staff looked on in awe. Even seasoned caretakers admitted that no one else could manage the chicks with such effectiveness. The Empress stood quietly, feathers ruffling slightly in admiration. "Perhaps humans are more remarkable than we believed," she thought, "not just in survival but in understanding life itself." Night came, and the nursery was quiet. The human child lay among the albino chicks, who nestled closely for warmth and comfort. The palace lights dimmed, leaving a soft glow on pale feathers and small hands. Outside, the stars shone cold and distant, but inside the nursery there was warmth, trust, and life. The Empress lingered outside the door, watching silently. She realized that the human child had changed the chicks, and through them, changed her understanding of the empire itself. A creature from a distant, dangerous world had brought something new. A reminder that strength and trust, care and connection, could overcome fear and fragility. For the first time in her long life, the Empress considered that the future of her empire might not depend solely on strategy, tradition, or force. Perhaps it also depended on something unexpected, on life itself, and the quiet courage of a small human child who loved her albino chicks more than anyone ever expected. And so, the bond grew, undeniable and unbreakable. The human child and the chicks became inseparable. The palace watched in wonder, the council whispered with concern, and the Empress began to hope. Hope that in this fragile, glowing, unexpected relationship, her empire might discover a strength it had never known before. The days grew warmer in the royal nursery as the human child continued to care for the albino chicks. Their bond had become stronger than anyone in the palace could have imagined. The chicks followed the child wherever it went, chirping and flapping in excitement. Even the strongest and most independent of the chicks would perch on the child's shoulder or nestle against its side. The palace staff, initially wary, had started to admire the human. Scientists recorded data constantly, documenting the chicks' progress, their improved health, and their rapid growth. Every day, the evidence was the same. The human child's presence brought life and strength to the fragile creatures. The Empress observed silently, her thoughts growing more complicated with each passing day. She had begun to understand humans in a way she never thought possible. They were not merely survivors of a harsh planet. They were intuitive, adaptable, and capable of deep care. They had instincts, patience, and emotional strength that her own people rarely demonstrated. And this small human child had proven it without words, weapons, or influence, simply through presence and love. However, the Empire was not without threats. News arrived that a neighboring star system, jealous of the Empress's power and the fame of her albino chicks, was planning an incursion. They had sent spies and scouts to observe the nursery, reporting that a human was influencing the chicks. They saw it as a weakness, a strange, unnatural bond that could be exploited. The palace council convened immediately. "Majesty," one official said, "we cannot allow this human to remain here. The neighboring empire will see it as a threat, or worse, an opportunity. They may attack." The Empress shook her head, her voice firm. "The human child will not be removed. It is under my protection. These chicks would not survive without it. And if another empire thinks they can challenge us over a child and a few chicks, they will learn the strength of trust and care." The council members looked uneasy. They had never seen the Empress so determined. "But Majesty, it is still a human. It could be dangerous." "Dangerous?" she replied, her eyes narrowing. "Perhaps, but so is life itself. The human has shown me strength that no weapon can match and loyalty that no contract can command. We will protect what is precious, not what is convenient." Meanwhile, the human child remained unaware of the political tension surrounding it. It spent its days with the chicks, exploring small games, feeding them and guiding their exercises. The chicks had grown larger, stronger, and even more intelligent. They began to respond to commands, learn patterns, and communicate in simple ways with the child. They could sense danger, comfort one another, and even show affection. One afternoon, an accident tested their bond. A minor fire broke out in one corner of the nursery. Flames licked the walls and smoke began to fill the room. The staff rushed to contain it, but panic spread among the chicks. They flapped and cried, scattering in fear. The human child remained calm. It gathered the chicks with gentle hands, speaking softly in soothing tones. One by one, they settled against the child, trusting completely. The fire crew arrived moments later, extinguishing the flames. Not a single chick was harmed. The palace staff whispered among themselves, amazed. "No one else could have calmed them," said one. Not even their caretakers or the scientists, only the human child. The Empress, standing silently outside the nursery, felt a mixture of awe and pride. She had thought her empire strong because of its armies, its technology, and its tradition. But here was a different kind of strength, the power of trust, care, and quiet courage. She realized that the human child, though small and fragile, had more influence over life itself than any general or advisor. News of the incident reached the rival star system. They were shocked that the Empress refused to remove the human and that the chicks continued to thrive. Some of their spies reported back in fear, noting the unnatural bond between species. They began to question their own assumptions about humans, wondering if perhaps there was more to this species than they had believed. Back in the palace, the Empress made a bold decision. She announced to the council that the human child would be officially recognized as under imperial protection, and the chicks were to be considered symbols of unity between species. The council hesitated but dared not oppose her. The announcement shocked many but also inspired hope. The human child, still unaware of the political weight of its presence, continued its simple routines. It played with the chicks, guided them in exercises, and spoke softly to them every day. The chicks responded in kind, their feathers shimmering, their wings strong, and their voices clear. They had grown into vibrant, intelligent creatures, more alive than ever before. As time passed, the Empress spent more moments observing quietly. She began to speak with the human, learning about its home planet, its experiences, and its understanding of life. She discovered that humans were adaptable, resilient, and capable of deep empathy. They survived in harsh conditions, faced danger without panic, and protected life instinctively. The Empress realized that her perception of strength had been incomplete. Her empire relied heavily on power, strategy, and tradition, but the human child had shown her something different, that true strength could also be measured by the ability to protect, nurture, and inspire trust. Then came the moment that would change everything. A messenger arrived from the rival star system, requesting a formal audience. They wished to negotiate, claiming they had misunderstood the Empress's decision regarding the human child. The Empress agreed, but with a condition. The human child and the albino chicks would be present. When the rival delegation entered the palace, they were stunned. They had expected a cold council chamber, perhaps a show of force. Instead, they saw the human child sitting quietly among the chicks, who were perched calmly on shoulders, nestled at feet, and chirping softly. The human's presence radiated calm and confidence. The delegation representatives froze. They had underestimated humans before, but this was unlike anything they had seen. They noticed how the chicks responded instantly to the child, their movements synchronized, their energy radiant. They realized that the child held influence that no amount of threat or diplomacy could match. The Empress spoke first, her voice commanding yet calm. "You see before you life, care, and trust. You see strength in a form you do not understand. This child is protected, and the chicks will not be harmed. If you wish to challenge us, remember that power is not only in weapons, but in what you nurture and protect." The delegation hesitated, fear and respect mixing in their eyes. They had come to test weakness, but what they saw was unmistakable strength. Humans, fragile by appearance, had shown them a lesson no technology or fleet could teach. Slowly they withdrew, leaving the palace in silence. The Empress turned to the human child, her expression softening. "You have changed my empire, little one, not with force, not with command, but with care, trust, and courage. I did not expect it, but I am grateful." The child smiled quietly, touching the albino chick's soft feathers. They chirped in response, nuzzling closer. For the first time, the Empress allowed herself to feel hope that her empire could thrive in ways she had never imagined. Over the following months, the human child and the albino chicks became symbols throughout the empire. Stories spread of their bond, and other rulers took note. Diplomats, traders, and travelers spoke of the child of the Empress, who had tamed the rare albino chicks. The story inspired awe and admiration, showing that even in a galaxy of power, weapons, and ambition, life itself could teach lessons of courage and trust. The Empress continued to watch over them, learning from their bond. She realized that the future of her empire was not only in strategy or authority, but also in understanding life, fostering trust, and recognizing unexpected strength. Humans, she concluded, were remarkable creatures, not because of their technology or armies, but because of their instincts, care, and courage. The albino chicks thrived more than ever. Their feathers shone, their movements were precise, and their voices rang with vitality. They played, learned, and grew alongside the human child, who guided them with gentle hands and a patient heart. Together, they created a harmony that had never existed in the palace before, a small but powerful example of unity and life. And finally, one quiet night, the Empress entered the nursery without announcement. She watched from the doorway as the human child sat among the chicks, stroking their feathers, speaking softly. The chicks responded with affection, nuzzling and chirping, safe and happy. The Empress felt a warmth she had never known, a sense of completion and hope. She realized the truth. Strength was not measured in fleets, armies, or politics alone. It could be measured in care, trust, and the courage to nurture life. And in that small, fragile human child and the rare albino chicks, she had witnessed a power greater than anything the galaxy had ever seen. The Empress smiled softly. She had expected surprise, and she had received it. She had expected challenge, and she had learned wisdom. And she knew that her empire, guided by both tradition and this unexpected bond, would thrive in ways she had never imagined. For the human child and the albino chicks, the future was bright. And for the Empress, the lesson was clear. Sometimes the smallest creatures carry the greatest power, and love, trust, and courage can shape the destiny of an empire.